Hey, what's up everybody? It's Mike from Cornfield Customs and I am back to show you how I'm going to install the deck lid skin to the inner structure on the 51 convertible. This was a big question I got in the last video about how I was going to do that and if I could do a video to explain it, about how I make a new flange and I edge weld it around the perimeter of the skin. So I'm going to show you that in this video, but first let me show you what's going on with the deck lid. So I've got the deck lid just set up here on the table, and the skin is just laid in place. You can see it's still loose. But I do have a Cleco here and a Cleco there just to hold the skin in place where I had it on the car. And that Cleco, I've got one upside down, but you can see it's right here where the hem is going to come through. So it'll be easy to hammer and dolly that out later. So that's why I left these two remaining Cleco holes here. The inside of the skin had been primed, and I went ahead and primed the inside of the inner structure with epoxy primer. So I did that, let it dry, and now we're ready to put the new hem edge on. So when I took the skin off, I just sanded the edge right here and removed the old hem edge. Well, that leaves the material short to create a new hem edge. So what I do is I cut 1/2-inch wide strips of the same material that I used to make the filler panel on the deck lid out of. So it's just a 1/2-inch wide strip, which matches the thickness of the old hem edge. And then I use the kick shrinker and stretcher and work that piece to match it to the correct profile of the edge of the deck lid. And then we end up with a piece like this that matches the deck lid profile. It looks kind of funky, but once you see it clamped in place, you'll see that it's been shaped to fit the right profile. And then what I do is I sand everything to clean it up, clean it with some lacquer thinner, and then I come back and I spray it with some weld through primer. And I'm using U-POL brand, just rattle can weld through primer, just so everything's nice and sealed. And then we end up with this. This piece is ready to go on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the camera back on the tripod and show you how I fit this up, the types of clamps that I use, and we'll get ready to weld it in place. So here on the deck lid skin, I mean, it's still loose, you can see, but I have a blue line, and that is just a reference point to where when I was using the kick shrinker and stretcher, I could line this back up. So this blue reference line lines up with this blue reference line. And I'm going to use some special little clamps. You don't have to use these, but I personally like them a lot. It's a grip-on edge clamp. You can use vice grips. You just need to be careful not to have too much pressure on the vice grip and leave marks in your panel. So what I'm going to do is, if I were just to lay this on top, you could see that it matches. But I have to do that underneath. So I'm going to come around and I'm going to get our reference mark lined up pretty close here. And I'm just going to put the clamp on loose at this point so I can still move this around a little bit to get everything to fit up. And the clamps aren't super tight, they're just snug. That way I don't deform the skin, but it pulls everything up into place. And I'm going to take our Cleco off of that and put it on the top side. That way we can continue to clamp this into place. All right, so now that I've got everything kind of loosely clamped, what I'll do is I will get a couple more clamps and I'll just use them to put in between these while I'm tacking everything into place. And then I'll drag the TIG welder out and we'll start TIG tacking the edge of the skin to our new hem edge, and we'll edge weld this. So let me get everything set up and we'll come back and get ready to start welding this in place. All right, so I got an extra clamp in here that I'm going to move around as I start tacking down in between the clamps that we have. I've got our TIG welder all set up. It's set at 50 amps. Everything's ready to roll. I've got a 16th inch ER70 S2 rod. Usually I use an 030 rod, but since I'm connecting these two sheets and I want to build that edge up just a little bit, I'm going to use a slightly thicker filler rod. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to let the camera roll. I'm going to come in, I'm going to start tacking this up. Just normal TIG welding sheet metal stuff. You know, heat it up, get the puddle formed, put the filler rod in, get everything tacked together, and then we'll come back and we'll hammer everything out, talk about it, and continue on with the process. Now that the whole edge is tacked, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a red Scotch-Brite and just clean off some of the soot. You're going to get a little bit of soot burn back because we do have primer on the flange and inside the deck lid. And the reason I didn't want to clean all of that off is because I don't want there to be bare metal in there. I want to keep it covered. So what I like to do is I tack it, and then I'll come back and just clean this off so it looks a little bit better. Kind of rolling the edge so it cleans everything. And then I come back with a wire wheel and a drill, and I use that just to clean this up a little bit. So the inner structure is in between the skin and the flange, or the hem flange, so there will be a little bit of a gap there, and that's okay. We'll just have to fill that with rod, but we're only talking the material thickness. It shouldn't be anything like an 1/8 inch or a 1/4 inch. So from there, I like to take a hammer and dolly, just like we're gonna hem a door skin, and I'm just gonna lightly tap the tacks and make sure everything's seated really nice. So I'm making sure to keep the dolly on the corner, and I'm hammering on the corner. I don't want to hammer and put a big dent in it. With everything hammered and dollied out, now I can come back and weld this solid. So what I'm going to do is, just like when we're welding our butt weld seams in sheet metal, I'm going to start at one end and work all the way across with as few stops and starts as humanly possible. That way we get a nice, consistent, heat-affected zone, so that'll be even expansion, even contraction, and if there's any warping, it'll be an even warp. So then it'll be way easier to correct. And even now, just rubbing my hand over it, I don't really feel any warping or anything like that yet. But granted, we are just at the tacked in stage. So again, I'm going to leave the machine set up for 50 amps. I might move this over on the table, maybe rotate it so I've got something to rest against. But yeah, we'll start at one end and work across with as few starts and stops as I can do, just to keep our heat very precise and even across the weld. So here the first edge is done, at least welded up. You can see our heat affected zone is nice and consistent. I'm not trying to get a stack of dimes or anything on the edge here. I'm just mainly wanting to make sure we connect that, everything's penetrating good and focusing on our heat affected zone. And the main reason for that is this is all gonna get hammered and dollied and sanded out anyway. So whether it looks good or bad, as long as you've got good penetration, even heat affected zone, that's all that matters to me. So from here, I'll repeat this process all the way around, get everything welded, and then we'll come back and we'll lightly dress the top and the bottom, and then we can hammer and dolly all of this out. So this is a little bit of a tedious process working all the way around, but it is what it is, and that's what you have to do. And I can already hear it now, the internet experts saying that I'm putting too much heat in the panel and I'm gonna destroy it. But being on the edge here, there's multiple thoughts here. I don't feel any warping at this point because we are edge welding here. If there is any, we can hammer and dolly it out. We can get the dolly underneath of it and sandwich it and hammer and dolly this weld and heat affected zone out. And fine, I'm warping it or whatever you want to say. So let's say that this is a stock panel and I have to tighten the gap up. How do you do that? Well, you weld a piece of round rod on there or you build up tacks and you move that edge over to tighten up the gap. So essentially, I'm doing the exact same thing as tightening up the gap, but I'm just putting a new flange on the bottom. And once we start fitting this to the car, I can almost guarantee you that we're gonna have to put another pass on here to close that gap up, depending on how it fits and just how tight of a gap we want. So all we're doing is the same thing as if we had to fill this gap anyway to tighten things up. And I don't see that big of a deal. I've been doing it this way for years and I've had really great success. So I'm gonna get back to it, let the naysayers say what they want, but I'm gonna keep working my way around, and once I get everything all welded up, we'll come back and talk about grinding it and hammering and dollying this edge and get it wrapped up so we can get it back on the car. So with the majority of it welded up on the sides and the front edge, I'm gonna leave the bottom alone for now. The majority of that has a hem edge on it from where I took out the license plate recess and those trim holes. So there is a flange that I still have to turn on that part, but I'm just gonna not weld the corners up just yet. I'm gonna go ahead and get in and start dressing these welds. So what I'm gonna use is a 36 grit roll-lock disc. I like the Norton Blaze discs on an air grinder, and we're just gonna come in and do our best not to make any contact with the parent material, but we're just gonna knock the top of the weld off all the way around, and then I'll flip it over on a moving blanket and I'll dress the bottom just to get this part nice and flat on the top and the bottom. I'm not so worried about the edge just yet. We're gonna hammer and dolly the flange to get all of this stretched back out, and then I'll come back and I'll dress the edge itself. So that's what's next. Let me get the grinder and we'll get to knocking the tops of the welds off. Now that everything's ground and dressed on the top side and bottom side, I have the deck lid upside down, and I'm gonna hammer and dolly out the flange and stretch the weld here, similar to how you do a door skin, where I like to hold the dolly with the tips of my fingers under one edge, and I'll hold that at a slight angle. That way I'm not getting into the skin and leaving tooling marks. And I'll hammer right here on the edge, feathering in to the flange. Like I said, it's a similar process to when you're putting a new door skin on a door frame. So it's the similar concept, and if there's some stubborn spots, I might flip it over and work from the other way. Doing that, you just have to be really careful not to get kind of loose with your hammer control and get tooling marks or smiley faces in the outer skin from the edge of your hammer. So I'm gonna get to hammering. Like I said, I'm gonna hold the dolly with my fingertips under it just so it helps keep that out of the skin, and hammer and dolly across it, working on stretching out the weld and correcting any tightness or warping that has occurred from the weld. One thing I did want to mention about hammering and dollying this edge is the fact that all we're trying to do is work the weld, which has the most shrink as it cools, and then the heat affected zone. That's why you can get away with just running the dolly on the bottom edge, because any of that warping or distortion is going to come from the weld itself or the heat affected zone, which is right here at the edge. So don't get carried away with trying to think, how am I going to get into this area of the panel way inside, because you can see our heat affected zone is just right here, but the majority of all the distortion and shrink is going to be on the edge and maybe in 3/8 of an inch. Don't get too wrapped up with having to chase that out. Just focus on the edge, get everything hammered back out, and you'll see that from time to time I rub my hand underneath. That's just seeing if I'm getting everything back to flat and any warping coming out. Because what you'll feel if you do this on your own is where the edge is that weld cools, it'll kind of pull down and you'll get a little bit of a pucker right here. So as I hammer that, it's going to stretch that weld and relax that area back down. So I just rub my hand underneath to see that it's pulling back to where I want it to be, and take your time, work everything as a unit. You don't have to sit here and work this much and then work this much. You want to keep everything even. So again, you'll see me work this way, and then I'll come back and I'll work a little bit farther, and I'll just overlap and blend, because I don't want to get wavy spots or overworked or stretched spots. So take your time, hammer and dolly it out slow, focus on the edge and where the majority of the heat was concentrated, and everything should come back out exactly the way it needs to be. So I'm gonna get back to hammering. Just wanted to tell you that little bit of information, so I'm gonna get back to it and see how it comes out. Now that we have our welded on hem edge all hammered and dollied out, I'm gonna come back and I'm just gonna lightly come across this with a grinder again to take out any light hammer marks. And at this point, I'm gonna slightly dress the flat edge just from where it has some weld buildup on it. I'm not looking to get it perfect at this point because most likely we're going to have to do some gapping work on the car. But I'll just run the grinder across it. I might run a Vixen file across it just to get any of these little low spots out from where we welded it, and our welds aren't perfectly smooth all the way across. So I'll do that, and then I'll flip the panel over and just make sure we don't have any high spots I need to work down with a slapper and a dolly. And same thing, I'll sand this top side. I'll end up using a high-speed sander that I've adapted a DA pad to, and then I can use DA paper so I get a nice fine grit. I'm not running in 36 grit. I can actually run 150 or 220, whatever I want to run, in DA paper on to sand the top side to get the heat affected zone out and some of those deeper 36 grit scratches along the edge where we dress the tops of the welds down. That's why it's so critical to not get into the parent material. That way you don't have to be trying to sand out a bunch of really deep 36 grit scratches in the sheet metal itself. All we needed to do was dress the top of the weld. So like I said, we'll go ahead, dress the inside of the flange here, and then the edge I'll clean up, then we'll flip it over and I'll sand the outside, and then all that's left is finish up this bottom here, and we'll be about ready to put it back on the car and see how it fits. From here, all that's left is the bottom edge where I have to close the hem that I left on that new panel up. So I'm going to go ahead and flip this over, and I'll make the last 2 filler pieces that bridge from where I've made new hem edge onto the piece where I'm going to fold the hem edge over. But I wanted to talk about, we still have these Cleco holes here and the one on the other side that I used to line up the panels. And there's a couple spots, I don't know if you can see it in the video really good, but it's just a little bit of a low spot in the weld. I'm not worried about that yet, or this Cleco hole. I want to get it put back on the car, and when I do some welding on the edge or whatever is needed to gap it, I'll address that then. I'm not going to address it now because I want to get the bottom done and this put back on the car to wrap this video up. So I'm gonna flip it over, address the bottom edge, get this thing done, and we'll get it put back on the car so you guys can see how it fits. All right, there you have it. The deck lid is back on the car. It doesn't fit perfect just yet. I don't have the latch in it, so I've just got this dead weight bag here to hold it closed. So I'm not really gonna do a lot of adjusting until I get the latch put in and that stuff, because here it's a little low in the back, but if I put shims under the back edge, that'll lift the back up and tighten it. And it just needs to be gapped and a little bit of fitting here and there. And this piece here is holding this side up, which is making that side go down. So there's just a lot of variables that are keeping it from fitting perfect at this point, but there's still a lot of work to be done. So this is as far as I'm gonna take the deck lid at this point until I get this quarter done and this quarter done and the latch and everything put in, and then I can start final fitting, twisting, tweaking, and working on getting the gap set right. So hopefully this was informative and showed you guys how I reinstall panels like doors and deck lids and hoods if I have to remove the outer skin from the inner structure. Hopefully it was informative. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If not, sorry you wasted your time, but it is what it is. That's just the way I do things here. It is a little bit of a long process, but if you're striving to have a high quality fit and finished part, you have to be able to take the panel off and get to the backside to work out your weld seams. So the panel had to come off the inner structure. So thank you guys so much for checking out this video. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment, make sure to like it. Let me know what you think of this video. Let me know what you think of some of the other videos if you check them out. And I really do appreciate all the continued support I'm getting on this channel. So thank you guys so much. It's greatly appreciated, and we will catch you guys on the next one.